She didn't want to be there. Not in that room. Not with that man. And definitely not on Christmas Eve. But fate has a way of cornering you when you least expect it, and sometimes the hardest rooms to walk into are the ones that change everything. Welcome back to Mr. Charles Stories. If you've ever had to smile through pain, if you've ever been summoned by someone who once broke your heart, stay with this story. Because Alexis never thought she'd see Lennox Vale again. Not after what he did. But what happened that night shocked everyone, including her. Tap that like button if you believe love and regret often walk hand in hand. Subscribe if you believe healing sometimes begins in uncomfortable places. Let's get into it. The clock blinked 5:14 p.m. Alexis closed the laptop in her lap and sighed. Her studio apartment was quiet. Too quiet. A half-eaten microwave lasagna sat on the coffee table next to a folded cardigan and an unopened card from her mother. Outside, New York's December chill bit at the edges of the windows, but inside, it wasn't just cold. It was hollow. This Christmas Eve was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be filled with music, warmth, and soft laughter. But nothing about her year had gone as planned. She'd lost her job in March. A business deal she'd poured her savings into tanked over summer. And in September, the man she thought would marry her ended their relationship with a vague text about needing space. So Alexis made peace with being alone this year. No dinner invitations, no gifts, no pretending. Just stillness, and maybe some wine later if she felt up to it. Until her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't pick up, but something in her gut told her to. Hello? Miss Lovell? The voice was crisp. Professional. Female. Yes. I'm calling from Greystone Holdings. You're still listed as an emergency contact for Mr. Lennox Vale. Alexis froze. She hadn't heard that name out loud in 2 years. Not since Paris. Not since everything fell apart. The voice on the line continued. He requested your presence. Tonight. Silence. Alexis blinked. What kind of emergency? I can't disclose details over the phone, but he asked for you specifically. Alexis's heart raced. It didn't make sense. Lennox Vale hadn't spoken to her in years. Not after ghosting her like she meant nothing. Not after that night in France. Her first instinct was to say no, but something pulled at her. A mix of confusion, anger, and unfinished business. She looked around her small apartment. The stillness didn't feel so peaceful anymore. An hour later, she was in a cab heading uptown. She didn't know why she said yes. Maybe she wanted closure. Maybe she wanted answers. Maybe she wanted to see his face one more time and remind herself that she'd survived him. Greystone Estate was nestled in the secluded edge of Westchester. Gated. Secluded. Timeless. The moment the gates opened, the cab driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Somebody's rich. Alexis gave a tight smile. Yeah. She hadn't been here in years. Not since company retreats. Back when Lennox was still the guarded, brilliant, emotionally unavailable CEO she'd tried so hard to figure out. Back when she still believed she could. The estate looked like something out of a holiday magazine. Wreaths hung perfectly. Strings of warm white lights trimmed the windows. A faint smell of pine and cinnamon filled the foyer as the butler led her through. Everything was perfect, except the silence. The kind of silence that made you feel like you were walking into something. Unfinished. The butler opened the grand double doors to the main hall. They're waiting. Alexis stepped in. The room was vast. High ceilings. A roaring fireplace crackled on the far end. At the center stood a long table already set for dinner. Crystal, china, cloth napkins folded like swans, and people. She didn't recognize most of them. Investors, distant family, board members maybe, all dressed to perfection, all looking at her like she didn't belong. And then she saw him, Lennox Vale, standing at the fireplace with a glass of scotch in hand. He turned. Their eyes met. Alexis didn't breathe. He looked different, leaner, older, sharper. The tailored suit hugged his frame. His hair was slightly longer, his beard more defined, but his eyes, still cold blue, still unreadable. "You came," he said. "I almost didn't." "I know." He nodded once and motioned to the seat beside him. She walked slowly, heels clicking softly against the marble. Every eye followed her, but Alexis didn't care. She was too busy trying to steady her pulse. Why now? Why her? What game was he playing? She sat down without a word. Lennox poured her a glass of wine. She didn't touch it. Dinner began. Polite conversation, clinking forks, forced laughter. Lennox didn't speak much, except to her. He leaned in occasionally, asking about her work, her health, her mother. He complimented her dress, not in front of anyone, but softly, under his breath, as if testing the water. And it wasn't flirtatious. It was thoughtful, too thoughtful, which only made her angrier, because 2 years ago he had every chance to be thoughtful, and he chose silence. She wanted to lash out, but she kept her tone even. "Why did you ask me here, Lennox?" He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted his glass and tapped it lightly with his ring. The room fell silent, and Alexis felt her heart crawl up her throat. What was he doing? All eyes turned toward him. Lennox Vale rarely gave speeches. He wasn't the kind of billionaire who chased attention. He didn't ramble, didn't charm. His silence had always been part of his power. So when he stood up at that long, lavish table and lifted his glass, the room fell into a hush that carried weight. Alexis's spine straightened. Her fingers tensed on her lap. She didn't like being looked at, especially not like this, like she was a question everyone else was waiting for him to answer. Lennox cleared his throat. "I know most of you expected tonight to be like every other year," he began. His voice was low, steady. "A dinner, a few drinks, a few toasts in honor of my father." A couple of people nodded, but this year I need to speak for myself, not as Vale's son, not as a CEO, but as a man who's made more mistakes than he cares to count. Someone shifted in their seat. The air was tight. Alexis stayed still. Lennox's eyes scanned the table, but they landed on her. "I hurt someone," he said. "Someone who didn't deserve to be hurt. Not by me, not by silence, not by cowardice." Alexis blinked hard. Her pulse beat in her ears. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. She was my right hand in business, my closest confidant, and for one night, the person I felt safest with. A soft gasp came from one of the women down the table. Lennox didn't flinch. She believed in me before my company had value. She protected my time, my brand, my name, and in return, I disappeared the moment she became more than convenient. He paused, breathing through his nose. "Some of you may wonder why she's here tonight." The room shifted again. Eyes flicked to Alexis and quickly looked away. "She's here," Lennox continued, "because I asked her. Because I wanted the truth to sit where I once allowed silence. Because I owe her that." He turned his full body toward her. "Alexis Lovell, I'd like you to come back." Silence swallowed the room. One woman's fork slipped off her plate and clattered to the floor. Lennox raised his hands slightly, not to the company, not as an employee. His voice softened. "To my life." The words hit her like wind across the face, swift, stinging, and completely disorienting. Alexis didn't respond. She couldn't. Her heart was too loud in her chest. People were still staring. No one said a word. Even the strings in the corner had stopped playing. She didn't look at him. She didn't move. Because this didn't make sense. He wasn't supposed to say these things. He wasn't supposed to want her back. He was supposed to stay unreachable, untouchable, the man who walked away from Paris and never looked back. Later, the clinking of glasses and awkward conversations resumed. The dinner moved forward, but Alexis barely touched her food. She felt too exposed, too angry, too confused. By the time dessert was served, she excused herself to the restroom. But instead of heading to the powder room, she took a hallway left and slipped into the study. She needed quiet. She needed space. She needed to breathe. But the moment the door clicked shut behind her, She realized she wasn't alone. Lennox was already there. Of course he was. He turned from the fireplace, eyes unreadable. "I figured you'd need air. You planned this?" Her voice cracked. "No, but I know you knew me." She folded her arms. "You knew the version of me that tolerated your silence. That would have followed you through fire just to be near your shadow. I'm not her anymore." He looked down for a moment, then met her gaze. "I know." Alexis stood firm. What was that back there? Some sort of performance? You wanted to clear your conscience in front of the people who sign your checks? "No." His voice was quieter now. "I needed you to hear it out loud. I needed you to know it wasn't your fault." She inhaled sharply. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I didn't leave Paris because of you. I left because of what you made me feel. And I wasn't ready for it." She turned away, biting the inside of her cheek. "I thought about calling," he said behind her. "I thought about writing, but I didn't want to be another man who used words to fix what his actions broke." She turned back slowly. "And yet, here we are. Words. In front of a room full of strangers." He nodded. "I deserve that." They stood in silence for a long moment. The tension between them had changed. It wasn't the same pain as before. It wasn't the gaping wound of abandonment. It was something quieter. A long ache. An old bruise she'd learned to live with. She studied him. The suit. The posture. The stillness in his hands. He looked different, not just in appearance. He looked stripped, like a man who had finally stopped hiding behind the cold shell of success. "I'm not the same girl from Paris," she said quietly. "I'm not the same man who left," he replied. Her jaw tightened. "So, what do you want from me?" "Time." She blinked. "I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking you not to shut the door permanently." Alexis stared at him. He wasn't begging. He wasn't pushing. He was just there. And somehow, that felt more disarming than anything else. She nodded once. Not agreement, not acceptance, just acknowledgement. "I'm leaving now," she said. "I didn't plan to stay this long." He walked her to the foyer without a word. Outside, the air had turned icy. Snow had started falling in slow, soft flakes. Her coat was already waiting. He held the door. She turned to him before stepping out. "If you're serious." "I am." "Then don't send flowers. Don't send gifts. Don't try to impress me with gestures." He nodded. "I won't. Just show up." His throat moved as he swallowed. Then he said, "Every time." Alexis stepped out into the cold, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel so heavy. The subway rumbled beneath her feet as Alexis walked through the downtown market the next afternoon. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Again. She didn't check it. She'd barely slept. Her mind had stayed stuck on Lennox's face. His voice. His words. It didn't make sense. None of it. He had shattered her when she was at her most hopeful. Left her with silence after giving her the softest, slowest kiss of her life, in the most romantic city on earth. And now, after years of radio silence, he wanted to make amends. She stopped by a flower stand and bought 2 lilies. Her mother loved them. As she waited for her change, her thoughts slipped back to Paris. Back to that night, 2 years ago. They were both exhausted. The conference had dragged into its 3rd day. Alexis had managed a dozen schedules, smoothed over a security miscommunication, and convinced a stubborn French translator to show up for Lennox's fireside panel. That night, Lennox had offered her dinner. Not with the team, just him. She remembered the restaurant, how quiet it was, tucked into a narrow street near the river, how he'd loosened his tie, how he'd asked her questions, real ones, not about her workload, but her family, her dreams, her favorite childhood memory. "I like listening to you," he'd said, after her story about her grandmother's porch in Maryland. She'd blinked at him, caught off guard. "I'm usually the one listening," she replied. "I know. That's why I meant it." They had left the restaurant walking shoulder to shoulder. He didn't touch her. He didn't even brush her hand. Until they paused by the Seine, and he looked at her like she wasn't supposed to be there, but he was grateful she was. He touched her face. No warning. Then he kissed her. It wasn't possessive. It was careful, like he knew he was crossing a line and wanted to do it gently. She kissed him back, fully. There, under the soft glow of street lamps and the sound of distant water, she let herself believe something was finally shifting, that maybe he wasn't as cold as he appeared, that maybe he saw her, not the assistant, not the shield, her. But the next morning, he was gone. He had left a message with the front desk, informing her his flight to London had been moved earlier than expected. That was it. No note, no explanation, no eye contact when they returned to New York. She spent 3 months waiting for a conversation that never came. Then she quit, and never looked back. Now, standing outside the flower shop, Alexis blinked back the heat in her eyes. She had moved on, or at least, she thought she had. But her body remembered. Her heart remembered. And that was the most frustrating part. How did you forget someone who never gave you closure? How do you unfeel a kiss that changed everything? She exhaled hard and walked toward the subway station. Enough nostalgia. Enough pretending. She had errands to run. That night, her phone buzzed again. This time, she checked it. A message from an unknown number. Didn't expect a response. But thank you for not storming out. Alexis stared at it. Short, direct, polite. Typical Lennox. She didn't reply. But she didn't delete it either. 3 days passed. Christmas came and went. Quietly, peacefully. Her mother had dropped by for hot cocoa and a laugh about old family photos. But that night, Alexis found herself rereading that text. Her thumb hovered over the screen, and for reasons she didn't fully understand. She typed back, "Why now?" He responded within seconds. "I saw your name on a file last month. It brought something back I'd tried to ignore." "What file?" "You submitted a proposal to one of our incubator partners. I recognized your formatting before I saw your name." She frowned. It was true. She'd applied to a startup grant 6 weeks ago under her new consulting firm, Lovell Strategies. She hadn't realized Greystone Holdings had any involvement. "So, that's what made you reach out?" "No. That's what made me realize I hadn't let you go." She didn't know what to say. Before she could decide, another message came through. "If I asked to see you again, just coffee, would that be insulting?" Alexis hesitated, then locked her phone. Not tonight. The next morning, the first snowstorm of the season hit the city. As she poured herself coffee and pulled a blanket around her shoulders, a knock came at the door. She opened it, confused. A delivery man held a package. "Are you Alexis Lovell?" "Yes." He handed her a thin, wrapped box with a plain card tucked inside. No label. Just handwriting she remembered too well. She opened the card first. "This is not a gift. It's a piece of Paris I thought you might want back." Inside the box was a photo, black and white. It was her, taken from the riverbank that night in Paris. She hadn't known the photo existed. She hadn't seen anyone take it. But there she was, standing in the light, her face turned toward Lennox, eyes half closed, lips parted. She looked happy, genuinely happy, and he had kept it. For 2 years. She placed the photo on her table, stared at it for a long time, and whispered to herself, "This man is going to mess with my peace again." But she didn't throw it away, because the truth was, he already had. The photo sat on her table for 3 days. Alexis didn't move it, didn't flip it over, didn't hide it in a drawer. She just let it sit, because pretending it didn't exist wouldn't erase what it made her feel. She had no idea he'd taken it. But the angle was unmistakable, slightly tilted, a soft blur around the edges. She looked vulnerable, unaware, unguarded. The expression on her face felt like a stranger to her now. That night in Paris had faded in her memory like a dream. But that photo? That made it real again. And it reminded her of something she didn't want to admit out loud. She'd been in love with him. Fully. Silently. Without permission. And even now, something inside her hadn't forgotten. The next day, her phone buzzed again. "Lennox, I'll be downtown tomorrow at noon. If you're near Fitz and Maple, I'll grab a table. No pressure." She stared at the message. She could ignore it. She probably should. But something about how he worded it, soft, restrained, almost unsure, made it hard to hate. So, at 11:45 the next day, she stood across the street from the small cafe, watching through the window. He was already seated, alone, no laptop, no phone in hand, just waiting, and he looked nervous. She wasn't used to that. She walked in slowly. He stood the moment he saw her. "Alexis, I can't stay long," she said, slipping into the chair across from him. "I won't keep you." He didn't order anything. She didn't either. The silence stretched. "I didn't know you took that photo," she said. His face softened. "You looked beautiful that night." "I wasn't asking for flattery." "It's not flattery. It's what I saw." She shook her head. "You shouldn't have kept it. I shouldn't have walked away. But I did. And keeping that photo, I don't know. Maybe it was my punishment, or my reminder." She tilted her head. "Why now, Lennox? Why open this door again?" He leaned back in his chair. "Because I've changed. And I know that doesn't erase what I did. But I also know I'd regret never telling you that the moment I left Paris, I knew I'd made the biggest mistake of my adult life." Alexis didn't respond. "I don't expect you to feel the same," he added quickly. "You don't owe me anything." "You're right. I don't." Another pause. "But I do appreciate the apology," she said, her voice low. He nodded. "You said you're not here to buy me back or impress me," she continued. "So, what exactly do you want?" "I want to earn the right to be in your life again," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "That's a long road." "I've got time." For the next 30 minutes, they talked like adults, not ex-somethings, not boss and assistant, just two people with history, hurt, and maybe a small opening for something else. When they stood to leave, she hesitated. "I meant what I said that night," he told her as they walked out. "I want to be better, not to win you, just because you were right. I was a man who didn't know how to show up." Alexis nodded. "So show up." He looked her in the eye. Every time. She didn't promise him anything, but she walked away slower this time. And for the first time in years, the past didn't feel like an anchor. It felt like a chapter, one she could choose how to finish. That night, she placed the photo in a small frame beside her bookshelf, not to romanticize it, not to forget what came after, but because sometimes memory isn't about preserving pain. Sometimes it's about honoring the truth of what you once felt and deciding what deserves to live with you now. If this chapter stirred something in you, if you've ever received an apology after years of silence, share your story in the comments. Have you ever had to face someone who broke your heart without warning? Do you believe people can truly change? Drop A if you've ever gotten a message you never expected. Tap like if you believe closure doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it just means getting clarity. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that speak to real love, second chances, and the strength it takes to heal. We're just getting started. Let's keep going. Alexis hadn't expected another invitation so soon. 3 days after their coffee meeting, a formal cream-colored envelope arrived at her apartment. No logo. Just her name written in Lennox's signature print, all sharp lines and clean spacing. Inside was an invitation. Dinner. Friday evening. Greystone Estate. Smaller gathering. Only close connections. A handwritten note followed. No pressure, but if you're willing, I'd like to introduce you to the people who matter most to me. Properly this time. No speeches. Just dinner. L. She set the invitation on her counter, staring at it for several minutes. He was trying. And not with money. Not with status. But with intention. Still, walking back into that house after everything it symbolized wouldn't be easy. She told herself it was just dinner, one night. Nothing more. Friday came faster than she thought. Alexis pulled on a simple emerald green dress, nothing flashy but elegant. Her curls were swept to one side, her heels modest. She didn't wear perfume. She didn't need armor. When she arrived, the house looked different. Still grand, still intimidating in its size, but quieter, less polished, fewer staff. The front door was opened by Lennox himself, and for a moment, it felt like a different timeline entirely. He was in a dark grey sweater and slacks, no jacket, no tie, no image to protect. "You came," he said softly. "You invited me." They shared a faint smile. He stepped aside. "Thank you." The dining room was warm. Smaller table, only 8 seats. She recognized a few faces: Lennox's godmother, the CFO she used to schedule meetings for, a cousin she remembered from the holiday party 3 years ago. No photographers, no formal servers, no staged decorations. Just a home-cooked meal, candles, and the soft sound of jazz playing from vintage speakers. Lennox led her to the seat beside him. Again. But this time, it felt intentional, not strategic. "Everyone," he said. "This is Alexis Lovell." She offered a polite nod, unsure how much these people knew or didn't know. But they welcomed her, warmly, and to her surprise, genuinely. Dinner started with laughter, light conversation, stories about childhood winters and awkward New Year's Eve mishaps. Alexis listened, offered a few comments, and occasionally caught Lennox watching her. Not in a controlling way, but like he was still trying to believe she was real. Halfway through the meal, the woman seated across from her, Lennox's godmother, Colette, leaned forward. "You worked with him back when he used to bark orders through a closed office door, right?" Alexis laughed, surprised. "I did." "And you survived?" "Barely." The table chuckled. Colette smiled. "I'm glad you're here. He's lighter with you around. He tries to hide it, but we all notice." Alexis's breath caught. She glanced at Lennox. He didn't deny it, didn't look away, just kept holding her with those eyes. After dessert, the group moved into the sitting room. Firelight danced against the walls. Someone opened a bottle of wine. Colette brought out an old photo album that made Lennox groan. Alexis felt like a guest in a memory she wasn't sure she belonged to, but no one made her feel out of place. And Lennox? He wasn't acting like the man she once worked for. He laughed easier. Shared space. Let people talk over him without correcting them. And more than once, he looked at her like he didn't need anything else from the night but her presence. When the evening wound down, he walked her to the door again. The entryway was quiet. Outside, the sky had turned deep navy. Cold air waited on the other side of the door. "I meant what I said," he murmured. No pressure. Alexis turned to him. "You meant it the other night, too." "I did." She hesitated. "Tonight was nice," she said. He smiled. "You made it that way." "No. Your godmother did. She likes you. She barely knows me. She sees the way I look at you." Alexis didn't answer that, but her heart stirred. She opened the door and stepped outside, her heels clicking against the stone path. "Good night, Lennox." "Alexis." She paused and turned slightly. He stepped forward, hands in his pockets. "I'm not asking for your heart. I'm not asking for you to forget. But if there's space, I'd like to keep showing you who I am now." Slowly, her breath puffed in the cold. She didn't say yes, but she didn't walk away either. That night, as she sat in bed scrolling through old messages, she stumbled across a voicemail she had never deleted. It was dated the day after Paris. She'd never listened to it. Her finger hovered. Then she hit play. "Alexis, it's me. I know I left too fast. I don't know how to explain it yet, but I need you to know you weren't wrong about what happened." "I was. I'm sorry." The message ended. She let the silence sit, then turned off her phone, and for the first time in a long time, she slept without waking in the middle of the night. Alexis didn't visit Greystone again for a few weeks. Lennox didn't push. Instead, he sent short texts, always once a week, never more, asking about her projects, congratulating her on a small business award she received, or sharing a book he thought she'd appreciate. She never felt crowded, and oddly, that made her lean in. In those weeks, she focused on work, cleared out some of her storage boxes, and even caught up with friends she hadn't seen since the breakup last fall. But in quiet moments, when her tea steeped, or when she paused in front of her framed Paris photo, her mind wandered back to that last dinner. Back to the way Colette had spoken with such familiarity, back to the way Lennox had looked at her, and how, for a moment, she felt like she belonged. So when he sent a message that read simply, "I'm hosting a small holiday planning meeting at the estate, not formal. Would love for you to join if you're free, no suits, no scripts," she said yes. The second time walking into Greystone was easier. Still big, still quiet, still intimidating in the way old wealth often is. But this time, the door opened to jazz music, cinnamon rolls on the table, and Lennox wearing joggers and a black sweatshirt. She blinked. "This is a trap," he smirked. "You were expecting cufflinks? I was expecting a catered brunch and a press release. Surprise." She set her bag down and followed the sound of voices into the lounge. 3 people sat on the floor. Colette, a woman from Lennox's development team, and his cousin Drew, who Alexis remembered as the only Vale who ever told jokes that landed. The room was filled with holiday card mock-ups, local non-profit flyers, and a whiteboard scribbled with phrases like, "Kids first, no cameras," "Food fancy," "Community Christmas drive," Lennox explained. "No speeches, just impact." Alexis raised her eyebrows. "You organizing a drive?" "Helping plan one," he corrected. "This was Colette's idea. I just fund the food trucks." She looked over the table. The flyers were colorful, personal, nothing corporate. It felt real. "Sit," Colette called out, waving her down. "We need someone with sense." Lennox wanted a QR code in the shape of a Christmas tree. Alexis laughed, walking over and dropping to the floor beside her. Hours passed. They debated flyer fonts, argued over cocoa flavors, voted on the playlist, and the entire time, Lennox didn't dominate the conversation. He offered suggestions, asked questions, took notes, and when Alexis spoke, he listened, like her words carried weight. And that shift, from being tolerated to being valued, chipped away at a wall she hadn't even realized was still standing. By early evening, the team dispersed. Drew left with 2 flyers stuck to his jacket. Colette hugged Alexis and whispered, "He's different with you. Don't let pride blind you." Alexis nodded, though her heart wasn't sure what to do with those words yet. She found Lennox in the kitchen pouring tea into 2 mugs. He handed her one. "You stayed longer than I expected. You were less annoying than usual." He smiled faintly. "Progress." They stood in comfortable silence for a few beats. Then she glanced at him. "What made you change, Lennox?" He didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "My father's funeral," he said quietly. "I stood in a room full of people and felt completely alone. I realized I'd built a life where no one actually knew me, and the one person who ever tried, I'd pushed her away." Her chest tightened. "You were the only person who ever told me the truth," he added, "even when I didn't want to hear it. You didn't reward that." "No," he admitted. "I punished it." She sipped her tea. "I'm not asking for a clean slate," he said, "but maybe a new page." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't walk away either. Before she left, he walked her to the front door again, a pattern she was slowly growing used to. But this time, she turned to face him. "I have one rule." He met her gaze. "Name it. No in-between. If you're going to be here, be here. Don't disappear again." "I won't." "You say that now." He cut her off. "No, I won't." The quiet between them settled deep. "I'm not trying to win," he added. "I'm trying to repair." Alexis looked down at her hands, then back at him. Start with consistency and respect. The rest, we'll see. Lennox nodded. She stepped outside, and he waited at the door until she disappeared into the car, not because he was trying to prove something, but because this time he wanted her to see he hadn't moved. The week between their holiday planning session and the next formal dinner passed without much fanfare. But for Alexis, it wasn't quiet. Something had shifted. She found herself looking forward to his texts, then wondering if that was dangerous. She caught herself smiling at inside jokes they'd exchanged years ago. She started checking the weather in Westchester, even though she lived in Brooklyn. What was worse, she didn't feel foolish about it. Not anymore, because Lennox hadn't given her words and disappeared. He hadn't overwhelmed her with gifts or manipulation. He'd simply shown up, and that was harder to ignore than charm. So when a proper invitation arrived in a sleek black envelope, Alexis didn't hesitate this time. The dinner was to be held in Greystone's main hall, the same room she'd first walked into just weeks ago, where silence greeted her and every pair of eyes had questioned her presence. Only this time, the energy was different. There was music playing from a live pianist. The lighting was warm and soft. The guest list had been trimmed down, maybe 30 people in total, all hand-selected, all with personal ties to the Vale legacy. And unlike before, when Alexis stepped through the doors, no one looked twice. She was no longer a stranger. She was expected. Lennox saw her instantly from across the room. He didn't make a scene. He didn't rush over. But his eyes softened, visibly. His lips parted slightly, like something inside him had unclenched. And when he reached her minutes later, he held her gaze as if anchoring himself. "I'm glad you came," he said simply. She smirked. "I heard the food was better when I'm around." He smiled, almost bashful. "That's probably true." They walked toward the long table together. No tension, no distance, and when he gestured for her to sit beside him again, she didn't hesitate. This time, it didn't feel strategic. It felt earned. Dinner flowed smoothly. There was laughter, toasts, a few jokes about Lennox finally learning to delegate. Alexis found herself genuinely relaxed, even playful. The cousin from Chicago told a story about Lennox trying to ice skate in designer shoes when they were 10. The room howled, and all the while, Lennox was calm, centered, not the uptight executive she once knew. He passed her the wine before she asked. He leaned in during side conversations. He touched her hand once, just briefly, when she said something under her breath, and he couldn't hold his laugh. It was light, and Alexis had almost forgotten how much she needed to feel that. Then Lennox stood. He didn't bang his glass this time. He didn't ask for attention. He just stood, tall, relaxed, and the room slowly quieted on its own. "I wasn't going to speak tonight," he began. "But there's something I want to say while we're all here." Alexis's heart skipped. She didn't know why. He looked around the room, slowly, intentionally. Then his eyes found hers, and didn't move again. "I've done a lot of things in silence over the years. Some of them strategic, some of them cowardly." A few people raised their brows. Some leaned in. "I used silence to avoid things I didn't understand, feelings I didn't know how to manage, people I didn't think I deserved." He didn't blink. "I've learned the hard way that silence can look like power, but feel like shame." He paused, and now every eye was either on him or on Alexis. She felt her palms grow warm. "I once hurt someone by saying nothing," he continued, "by letting distance speak for me when I should have been brave enough to speak for myself." He turned slightly now, addressing the room. "You all know, Alexis." A few heads nodded. "But some of you don't know what she means to me." Her chest tightened. "She was my voice when I didn't know how to have one, my clarity when I was too proud to admit I was confused, and my wake-up call when I realized legacy without connection is just noise." Someone near the end of the table said, "Damn." The tension cracked slightly. Lennox smiled faintly, then turned back to her. "Alexis, I don't want to rewrite the past. I just want the next chapter to include you, if you'll let it." Gasps echoed softly. A few guests looked at her now, but she didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She didn't cry. She took a slow breath and nodded. Just once. It was small, but it was everything. Alexis hadn't planned on speaking. Not in front of all those people. Not after Lennox's very public, very personal declaration. But as soon as she nodded, the room shifted. Something passed between them. A kind of acknowledgement, the kind that doesn't need applause or approval. Just breath. Lennox sat down without another word. There was no grand finale, no dramatic music, just warmth. And conversation resumed, soft, respectful, even sweeter than before. Colette leaned in from across the table, eyes twinkling. That's the first time he's ever said anything like that. In public, no less. Alexis managed a small laugh. He didn't warn me. He couldn't. He would have overthought it and chickened out. Alexis tilted her head. You know him that well. Baby, I changed his diapers. They both laughed. Colette patted her hand. You ground him. I don't think he knew how much he needed that until he lost it. Alexis went quiet, because deep down, she had needed him too once, in ways she didn't fully understand back then. But she also remembered the pain, the disappointment, the silence. And now it was all tangled, healing, trust, caution, curiosity. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of that mix. After dinner, guests filtered into the adjacent parlor. Holiday music played from the record player. Lennox stayed near Alexis but didn't hover. He chatted with two board members, then helped an older woman with her coat. Alexis watched him from across the room, and the strangest thing happened. She realized she wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. She wasn't bracing for a switch in his tone or a disappearing act. Because since that first night, Lennox had done one thing consistently. He'd kept showing up, quietly. And that, more than any confession, had started to rebuild something inside her. Later, while sipping warm cider near the fireplace, Alexis heard someone approach from behind. Hey, she turned. It was Lennox. Can I borrow you for a second? He asked. She nodded and followed him into the hallway, the same hallway she'd walked down on that first awkward night, when everything between them was covered in tension and silence. But now, it felt different, lighter. He stopped near the gallery wall where framed black and white photos of his family hung. This used to be the coldest part of the house, he said, hands in his pockets. She looked at the photos, generations of polished faces. His father, his grandfather, corporate men in suits, women in pearls. It still feels stiff, she said honestly. He smiled. That's what I wanted you to see. He pointed to a blank spot in the center. I'm clearing this wall next week. Every single portrait. I want to fill it with something else. She blinked. What? People who've shaped me, friends, community, team members. People who told me the truth even when I didn't like it. He looked at her, steady. I want you up there. She tilted her head, surprised. Why? Because this wall shouldn't be about legacy, he said. It should be about impact. Alexis studied him. No grand gestures, no romantic plea. Just truth. And it hit her in the quiet. She'd been waiting to feel safe with him again. And this was safety. She didn't give him an answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand. It wasn't a kiss. It wasn't a promise. But it was something solid. And Lennox squeezed it once before letting go. Good night, Alexis. Good night. And as she walked away, she realized he'd changed the room. But more than that, he'd started changing himself. Not for her, but because he finally wanted to be someone worth standing beside. That night, she rode home in silence. No music, no podcasts, just her thoughts, soft and steady. And for the first time in years, she didn't question if she'd been too forgiving, because forgiveness hadn't happened yet. But possibility, that had started, and that was enough. Saturday mornings had always been Alexis's favorite. Something about the quiet, the light that spilled in differently, and the way the city took its time waking up. She normally used that time for errands, deep cleaning, or catching up on backlogged client messages, but not this time. This time, she opened her laptop, stared at the home screen, and then closed it again. Because for the first time in a long time, her mind wasn't on work. It was on him, on the way Lennox had looked at her when he spoke in front of that room. Not desperate, not self-serving, but honest. And on the way, her heart didn't panic. Not even once. She still hadn't answered him about the portrait wall. Not because she was hesitant, but because this wasn't a race. He said he wanted to start slow. She believed him. So, she let him. Later that morning, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, she found a man holding a small flat box and a folded piece of paper. For Alexis Lovell, she nodded and accepted the delivery. No signature required, no sender listed. Inside the box was a book, worn edges, a few underlined passages. Inside the cover, a handwritten note. "You told me once you never finished this. I thought you should have it back. L. The book? A vintage print of The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. She'd loaned it to him years ago, the week after Paris, before everything went silent, back when they used to argue about politics, art, and the cost of ambition. She didn't think he kept it. But here it was, returned, intact, cared for, and maybe symbolic. That afternoon, her phone buzzed. "Lennox, if you're not busy tomorrow, the fireplace in the study still makes the best tea." "No pressure," she replied after a beat. "What time?" The next day, she walked into Greystone for the 5th time since Christmas Eve. And for the first time ever, it felt like familiar ground. Not hers. Not yet. But familiar. Lennox met her at the door. No formal wear, no wine. Just jeans, a white shirt, and bare feet. "You really do live here now," she teased. "Trying," he replied, stepping back to let her in. Shoes or no shoes? She glanced down. "I'll match your energy." He smiled and led her down the hallway. Not to the main lounge, not to the formal dining area, but to the study, the same room where she had once confronted him. Arms folded, voice trembling. But now, it felt warmer, less like a room of confrontation and more like a space of reconnection. A fire burned low in the hearth. A tray with 2 mugs and a honey jar sat on the coffee table. The room smelled like cedar and lemon peel. They sat on opposite couches, facing each other. She wrapped her hands around the mug. "Thank you," she said softly, lifting it slightly. "For what?" "For remembering." "For the book. I kept it on my desk," he said. "For years. I told myself it was for the quote on page 63, but you weren't ready to let it go." "Exactly." A pause settled in. "Comfortable." He sipped, then set his cup down. "Do you want to ask me anything?" Alexis blinked. "What?" "You're careful now. I get it. But I want you to know you can ask me anything. No more closed doors." She exhaled slowly, thinking. Then said, "Why did you never try to fix it sooner?" He didn't flinch. "I thought I didn't deserve a second chance, and part of me hoped you were thriving without me, that maybe you didn't need me at all." She didn't hide her reaction. "That sounds convenient." It was fear, disguised as nobility. She nodded, accepting that. He continued, "I watched your career from a distance, saw your name on panels, your quotes in articles. You were building something, and I didn't want to interfere, but now you do." He met her gaze. "Now I don't want to live wondering what I could have built with you. Not just near you." The words settled into the space between them. Not romantic, not manipulative, just intentional and honest. Later, they moved from the couches to the floor, each with a mug refilled. They shared updates about work, laughed about how Alexis once caught him taking calls from the wrong time zone, and even pulled out an old box of photos Colette had left by accident. One image made Alexis freeze. It was from the holiday gala 5 years ago, before Paris, before things shifted. She was in the background, laughing at something off camera. And Lennox? He was in focus, staring at her. Expression unreadable, but undeniably focused. "You were watching me," she whispered. "I always was." She handed it back to him, heart thudding. He placed it on the table between them. "I was too afraid to say anything then," he murmured. "Now I'm more afraid not to." Alexis looked at him, her breath caught, but she didn't speak. Instead, she leaned back against the couch, letting the silence wrap around them again. Because sometimes the loudest healing doesn't come from answers. It comes from finally feeling safe enough to ask the questions. And in that study, once a room of tension, they began again. Not with a kiss, not with a promise, but with presence. And that, for now, was enough. The following week settled into a rhythm neither of them expected. Lennox didn't overreach. He didn't flood her inbox. He didn't try to pull her into his world again. Instead, he built a bridge between them, piece by piece. Every Thursday, they'd text. Every other Sunday, they'd meet. Sometimes at Greystone, sometimes at a quiet cafe tucked between two old bookstores on the Upper West Side. And during those moments, Alexis began to let her guard down, not all the way, but enough to see him differently, not as the man who had once disappeared after a kiss that changed everything, but as the man who was finally showing up, consistently, quietly, and that made all the difference. One chilly afternoon, they met at the cafe again. Lennox arrived early, as usual. Alexis spotted him through the fogged-up glass, holding a paperback in one hand and stirring tea with the other. She stepped inside, her coat dusted with flurries. "You started without me." "I needed to warm up," he said, standing to pull out her chair. She gave him a look. "Chivalry isn't your thing." He smirked. "Maybe I'm learning." They sat, the server bringing over fresh tea and a slice of apple tart. "Before you panic," Lennox said, "I didn't order it for you. I just remembered it was your favorite." She paused. "That's oddly thoughtful. I've had time to reflect." Alexis chuckled as she picked up her fork. What kind of billionaire has time to reflect? The kind who finally got tired of being alone. The table went quiet, not heavy, just still. She chewed slowly, then said, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been if you'd just talked to me after Paris?" "All the time. And I regret it. Every single version of it." Alexis met his eyes. "Then what stopped you?" He took a breath, leaning back. "My father taught me that vulnerability was weakness, that emotions were private currency. You didn't spend them unless you had something to gain." She frowned. "That's bleak." He nodded. "It was, but I believed him. And when I kissed you in Paris, I realized I had something to lose." "So you ran." "I vanished," he corrected, "and it haunted me. But I didn't know how to face you without feeling like I'd ruin you if I stayed." "You wouldn't have ruined me," she said, voice quiet. He nodded slowly. "I see that now." Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, they sat with their tea. Then Alexis said, "You said something the other day, about legacy without connection." He nodded. "Did you mean that?" "I did." "Then show me what your life looks like when you're not performing it." Lennox blinked. "Now, no, but soon. I don't want dinners and declarations. I want honesty." He nodded again. "Okay." A few days later, he invited her to something unexpected. A warehouse in the Bronx. She hesitated, but he promised it wasn't a trap. When she arrived, she was surprised to find a large open space being converted into a free art residency, part of a youth mentorship program. "I invested in this 3 years ago," he explained. "But I never showed up in person. I just wrote checks." Alexis walked slowly along the back wall, where sketches and blueprints lined corkboards. "Why bring me here? Because this is the part of me I never let you see, the part that cared." But quietly, she looked at him. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was trying to be real, and that was worth more than any Christmas toast or speech. Later that night, as they stood outside waiting for their rides, Alexis said, "You know I'm still not fully in, right?" "I know. But I'm not out either." He nodded. "I'll keep showing up." She looked up at him. "I don't want to make the same mistake again," she whispered. Giving too much without knowing what's being held. He didn't reach for her. But he did answer. "You don't have to give anything yet. Just let me earn the space I already took up." She smiled, small but real, then added, "I still want to be mad at you sometimes. You can be. I might bring it up randomly. I'll listen. And I'm not promising anything. I'm not asking for that." They stood quietly as the streetlights flickered to life. Then he said, "But I am hoping." Alexis bit her lip, and for once, she didn't fight the warmth rising in her chest. She didn't run from it either. She just stood beside him, and in that stillness, chose to stay. Alexis had always believed that healing wasn't loud. It wasn't marked by fireworks or grand speeches. It was quiet. It happened in long walks, unsent messages, and subtle shifts, like remembering how to exhale without feeling grief crawl up your spine. And lately, that quiet was showing up in ways she hadn't expected. She no longer felt the urge to brace every time Lennox texted. Her shoulders didn't tighten when she thought of Greystone, and when she saw him smile, she didn't immediately question what it meant. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was no longer bitterness either. Sunday afternoon brought a different kind of rhythm. Lennox had invited her to a neighborhood park not far from where he grew up, a space he rarely mentioned, much less returned to. "I figured we could walk," he'd texted. "No suits, no script, just me and you." She'd almost declined, but curiosity won. He was waiting at the entrance when she arrived. Black hoodie, faded jeans, no car, no entourage, no polished exterior, just Lennox. They started walking the loop in silence. Kids ran past them. A golden retriever chased a ball across a muddy field. An older couple held hands on a bench. After a minute, Alexis said, "You grew up around here?" He nodded. "A few blocks down. My father bought this park for the city when I was 16. She gave him a look. "Bought the park?" He chuckled. "Technically, he funded the renovations and rebranded it with his name. Then we moved to the estate 6 months later, so you never really got to enjoy it." He shook his head. "Not like this." They kept walking. At a quieter bend of the path, Lennox spoke again. "There's something I've never told anyone." Alexis glanced at him, cautious. "I was supposed to propose to my ex here." Her brow rose. "The one before Paris?" He nodded. "I had it planned, the whole thing, ring in my pocket. Photographer hiding behind that tree over there." She followed his gesture. "What happened?" "She said no before I even asked." Alexis blinked. "She saw the signs," he said. "She knew I was performing something I didn't even understand, that I didn't know how to connect, only how to manage. That's harsh." It was honest, and in hindsight, she was right. Alexis looked down at the path beneath their feet. "Why tell me that now?" "Because I don't want to pretend with you," he said. "And if you're going to keep walking beside me, you should know who I used to be." She appreciated that, even if it stung a little. They reached the edge of the small lake. The surface shimmered, still and cold. Alexis paused and looked out. "You ever worry we're too different now?" she asked. Lennox stepped beside her. "All the time." She turned. "And that doesn't scare you?" "It does, but not enough to stop trying." She let that sit, then asked, "Do you think we're doing this right?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I haven't felt this honest in years." She gave a small smile. "I'll take that." They sat on a bench near the water, shoulders close, hands almost touching, and for a long stretch of quiet, neither of them filled the air with explanations or stories. They just sat, and for Alexis, that silence didn't feel like avoidance. It felt like progress. Later that evening, back at her apartment, she received a message from Colette. "He's softer now, but still learning. Be patient with him, baby. but not too patient. He respects your fire. Alexis stared at the text, smiled, and replied, I'll keep my fire where it belongs, near the truth. That night, she dreamed of Paris. But this time, she didn't wake up angry. She woke up calm, because in her dream, he stayed, and in real life, he was learning how to. Greystone looked different in the spring. Alexis hadn't planned to notice, but she did. The ivy on the back wall had started to climb higher. The light in the foyer felt warmer, and somehow, the silence she used to dread when stepping into the estate now felt peaceful, like a place that had been redefined by time and truth. She'd come by to drop off some designs. Lennox was revamping a scholarship foundation he'd quietly funded for years, and Alexis had offered to review the branding before launch. They were keeping it community-based. No photo shoots, no headlines. Just support. Real, quiet support. She found him in the upstairs library, sitting at the long oak table, glasses on, laptop open. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled to his elbows. A cup of something steeped beside him. It smelled like ginger and mint. He looked up when she entered, and smiled. Not the smile he used at meetings. Not the one he used at press events. This one was his, and it was for her. They worked for over an hour, adjusting font sizes, rewriting the mission statement, testing mock-ups on both desktop and mobile. No flirting, no tension, just flow. And when they reached the end, Alexis closed her laptop and leaned back with a stretch. That's better, she said. Much, he agreed. She sipped the tea he'd made her, then glanced around. I never used to feel comfortable in this room. He looked up. It felt stiff, like I was walking into a place that expected me to shrink. Lennox nodded slowly. It used to be like that. What changed? You, he said without pause. Alexis raised an eyebrow. You called out what didn't feel right, he continued. Even when I didn't like hearing it. She gave him a soft smirk. I still might do that. I hope so. A pause. Then she asked, Do you still want me on that portrait wall? Lennox didn't blink. Yes. Even if I never become what you once hoped I'd be. He leaned forward, voice even. You already are. She held his gaze for a moment longer, then nodded. They went downstairs together. He walked her to the door, like always. But this time, when she reached for the handle, he touched her wrist gently. She turned. I know we haven't talked about labels, he began. No, we haven't. I don't want to push. But, she asked, eyebrow raised. But I want you to know I'm not confused. I know what I want now, and it starts and ends with you. Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from how calmly he said it, how certain it sounded. She stepped closer, not touching him, just closing the space between them. I'm not ready for promises, she whispered. I'm not asking for any, he replied. But I do want truth. You have it. A pause. Then she said, I'll keep showing up. If you do. He didn't nod. He didn't promise. He simply leaned forward and kissed her cheek. Then said, Every time. And for once, she didn't doubt him. Later that night, Alexis stood in her apartment holding the final version of the scholarship flyer. Her name was printed at the bottom in small font. Program consultant, Alexis Lovell. She smiled, not because her name was on it, but because she knew her presence helped shape something that would matter. And maybe, just maybe, that's what love should feel like a quiet contribution to something greater than just romance, something that changes the room, one truth at a time. If you've ever rebuilt something with someone who once let you down, you know it's not about grand gestures, it's about the little things done consistently. What's one small act of change you've witnessed that meant everything? Have you ever let someone back in, slowly and on your terms? Tap like if you believe growth deserves a second look. Subscribe if you believe love starts with showing up and staying present. The journey isn't over. It's just getting real. The following weekend, Alexis stood in the kitchen of Greystone with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back, helping Lennox slice vegetables for a community dinner his team was hosting at the estate. Yes, the Greystone. The same estate that once made her feel like a stranger in borrowed air now smelled like garlic and rosemary. Real food, no catering, just chopping boards, clanging pans, and soft music playing from a Bluetooth speaker in the corner. Colette had orchestrated the idea, a warm table dinner for young scholarship recipients and their families. No speeches, no suits. Just a night to share a meal, talk, and remind everyone that they were seen. Lennox had agreed without hesitation, and to Alexis's surprise, he hadn't hidden behind his money. He'd rolled up his sleeves too. She'd watched him earlier helping someone's grandmother carry trays inside, then stepping into the kitchen to check on timing. No barking orders, no performance, just presence. And it was oddly attractive. No, not odd. Comforting. He handed her a peeled carrot, smirking. Still remember how to cut at an angle? Please, she said, laughing. You act like I forgot how to survive a boardroom and a kitchen. You always were good with knives. She pointed the blade at him playfully. Don't tempt me. He chuckled, brushing a hand across her lower back as he passed behind her. Nothing suggestive, just a natural connection. And that was the difference now. Nothing felt forced. Everything felt mutual. By the time the guests arrived, the long wooden table in the garden was glowing under strands of soft lights. Dozens of dishes were passed, laughter bounced off the trees, and children ran around chasing each other in the grass. Alexis found herself talking to a teenage girl named Kayla who had dreams of starting her own consulting firm. Like you, she said, eyes wide. Lennox watched from a few feet away, his expression unreadable, but warm. When the girl walked off, he stepped closer. She likes you. She reminds me of myself, Alexis said. Hungry for more? No, she replied, eyes distant. Hungry to be taken seriously? He nodded, slowly. That used to be me too. She turned to him. And now I'm learning how to listen better. Later, after dessert had been cleared and families began saying their goodbyes, Alexis found herself standing under one of the patio heaters, arms wrapped around herself, watching the last few guests leave with containers of leftovers and smiles on their faces. Lennox joined her quietly. Tonight meant something, she said, not looking at him. I know. I think you've stopped trying to impress me. He raised an eyebrow. That obvious? She turned to him. It's the best version of you. They stood there for a long moment, their bodies close but still separated. By a small space neither of them was quite ready to cross. And that space? It no longer felt like avoidance. It felt like respect. He walked her to her car. As they reached the driver's side, he paused. I used to think love was something you had to control, he said. Something you kept in check, measured out so it didn't make you weak. Alexis looked up at him. And now I think real love looks more like what you did tonight, sitting with strangers, laughing without needing to prove yourself. Just being, giving. She said nothing. He stepped back slightly. I don't want to ruin what we're rebuilding by rushing, but I also don't want to act like this isn't something real. Alexis opened the car door, then looked back at him. I know it's real, she said softly. I just want to make sure it lasts. He nodded once, then said the words that meant more than any declaration. I'm willing to wait. She smiled. Then I'll meet you halfway. That night, as she lay in bed, Alexis thought back to the woman she used to be, the one who waited for him to call, the one who cried in her studio apartment when silence stretched too long, the one who questioned if she'd been too much or not enough. And now she was showing up with her whole self. And he was meeting her there. It wasn't perfect, but it was finally equal. A few days later, Alexis found herself sitting at the corner table of Lennox's favorite bookstore cafe, the one tucked between a wine shop and a forgotten art gallery. It was the same place they used to visit when things were simpler, before Paris, before silence, before everything fell apart. She had agreed to meet him here, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to. That was the difference now. She wasn't showing up out of curiosity. She was showing up with clarity. Lennox arrived right on time. No dramatic entrance. No tension. Just a smile, 2 takeaway coffees, and the quiet confidence of a man who finally understood how to meet someone halfway. He sat across from her, sliding 1 cup across the table. Almond milk, 2 pumps of vanilla. Still your favorite? She raised an eyebrow. Since when do you remember details like that? Since I stopped thinking, I already knew everything. She took the cup, then said softly, I like this version of you. I'm still learning him. That's okay. I'm still learning me too. They talked for over an hour, about books, about new scholarship applications, about the way his team was changing without his micromanagement. Alexis listened, really listened, because Lennox didn't sound rehearsed anymore. He sounded like a man who'd stopped pretending to be perfect and started practicing being honest. Halfway through a conversation about community housing programs, she stopped him. Do you ever wonder how this would have looked if we never went to Paris? He paused. Sometimes. But I don't think we'd be sitting here like this. Why not? Because we'd still be pretending. She tilted her head. And now? Now, there's nothing left to perform. After coffee, they walked toward the park without planning to. Alexis stuffed her gloves into her coat pocket, the crisp air flushing her cheeks. I want to ask you something, she said. Okay. Back then, when I was just your assistant, did you ever think about me the way I thought about you? He didn't look away. Yes. Her breath caught. Then why didn't you say anything? Because I was trying to protect what you were giving me. Stability, trust, structure. I thought naming the connection would ruin everything. And now you know better. I know naming it would have honored it, even if it failed. They reached a bench, sat, and for a moment, the only sound between them was the breeze brushing against dry leaves. Then Lennox turned to her. Can I tell you where my mind's been lately? She nodded. I think about you in small ways, not grand, not cinematic, just real. Like waking up and wondering how your morning went, or walking past a bookstore and hearing your laugh. Not as a fantasy, but as a possibility. Alexis blinked hard. I'm not trying to make you fall for me again, he added. I'm trying to build a world where you're safe to choose me, or not, and still feel respected either way. She couldn't speak, not yet, but she leaned into his shoulder, and he didn't move. He just let her stay there, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That evening, Alexis sat in her apartment, sorting through old journals. In one from years ago, she found a page that read, I don't need perfection. I need consistency. A presence I can lean on, not escape from. She stared at the words, closed the book, and smiled to herself. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't searching for that anymore. She was sitting across from it, week after week, in little ways, and it felt like the start of something steady, something earned. The annual Vision Gala wasn't just an event, it was the event. Black tie, high donors, policymakers, foundation heads, journalists. Every year, the ballroom inside the Fulton Arts Center shimmered with curated elegance, and every speech held the weight of legacy. Normally, Alexis wouldn't have attended. She'd always viewed those spaces as performative, where the people who funded. Change never actually touched the lives they claimed to care about. But this year was different, because this time, she had a seat at the table, not as a date, not as someone's +1, but as the keynote speaker. When Lennox asked her 2 weeks earlier if she'd accept the honor, Alexis nearly declined. I don't do spotlights, she'd said. That's funny, he replied. You've been a lighthouse since the day I met you. She rolled her eyes, but something about the way he said it stayed with her. She wasn't interested in applause, but she was interested in using her voice, her real voice, to say something that mattered. So she said yes. On the night of the gala, she stood in front of her full-length mirror, adjusting a deep navy gown. Simple, elegant, no sequins, no statement jewelry, just confidence. Colette had insisted on styling her hair. Lennox had sent a car but not a note, because he knew she didn't need encouragement. She needed respect. When she stepped into the ballroom, she didn't freeze. She didn't scan for validation. She walked in like she belonged, because she did. Lennox saw her first. He was standing near the stage, speaking with a few board members. The moment their eyes met, his posture shifted. Not with hunger, not with possession, but with pride. She walked up slowly, and he didn't touch her. But his eyes never left hers. "You're here," he said. "You invited me. I didn't think I'd ever see this day." "What? Me at a gala?" "No, you." He paused. "Being seen the way you've always deserved." Her chest tightened, but she didn't let it show. Because she hadn't come to be romanticized. She came to speak. The coordinator motioned for her to approach the podium 5 minutes before her scheduled speech. Alexis walked backstage, glanced at the small note cards in her hand, and left them on the table. She didn't need them. She knew her truth. And tonight, she would speak it. The crowd quieted as she stepped to the mic. She took a breath, held it. And then, when I was 23, I thought visibility meant validation, that the louder the applause, the more value I carried. But I learned something over the years, especially the quiet ones. Being seen by the world means nothing. If you're invisible to yourself, a hush swept the room. I'm not here to dazzle you. I'm not here to charm you. I'm here to remind you that impact isn't always funded. Sometimes it's whispered. Sometimes it's offered in silence, in presence, in truth. People leaned in. I've been overlooked in rooms where I built the very tables being celebrated. I've smiled through conversations where my name was misspelled on the program, but printed on every strategy. But I don't carry resentment. I carry clarity. Lennox stood near the edge of the ballroom. He didn't blink. She was holding the entire room in her palm. Tonight, I don't speak as a symbol. I speak as a woman who finally chose her voice over her proximity to power. And in doing so, I found something far more valuable than applause. I found peace. When she stepped down, the applause came. Loud, long, real. But Alexis didn't smile because of it. She smiled because she hadn't needed it. The keynote replayed across multiple platforms. Clips from Alexis's speech were shared by equity groups, economic roundtables, and even a few state agencies. One quote in particular went viral. "If they only see your silence as cooperation, then it's time to speak, not to get louder, but to get clearer." Her inbox swelled with media requests. But she wasn't interested in being famous. She was focused on influence, the kind that lived in the rooms without hashtags. So when a senior director from one of the country's largest funding bodies reached out requesting a meeting, she didn't say yes for clout. She said yes because she knew who she could bring with her. That afternoon, she invited 2 of her mentees to join the call. One was a founder building a wellness brand rooted in ancestral care. The other, a data engineer creating tech tools for social workers in under-resourced neighborhoods. They sat beside her, nervous but prepared. When the call ended, both women looked at Alexis like she had opened a door they never knew existed. Because she had. And she didn't need to explain why. She just smiled and said, "Next time, you'll lead it." Later that week, Lennox met her at a quiet jazz lounge in Harlem. He had already reserved their table near the back, low-light velvet chairs, no paparazzi. When she arrived, he stood without saying a word, then held out his hand. She took it. For a moment, they didn't speak, just stood in the rhythm of the bass line, her thumb resting against the curve of his palm. Then he pulled out a small envelope, no branding, no initials. She raised an eyebrow. "If this is a ring, you're violating your no-pressure clause." He smirked. "It's not." Inside was a folded piece of thick paper, the first print proof of the new foundation's charter. Her name sat beside his in the top margin, CO Executive Trustee, Alexis Lovell. Her breath hitched. He didn't explain it, didn't push it, just said, "This isn't a favor. This is structure. I don't want to build anything that doesn't reflect who helped restore the ground it stands on." Alexis ran her thumb across her name, then nodded. He relaxed. the kind of relaxation that came from years of holding his breath. They danced later that night. No one else noticed them, but Alexis did, because the man whose silence once bruised her now swayed beside her, quiet, present, and unshaken. And she realized something in the way his hand rested at her waist, in the steadiness of his gaze. This wasn't about redemption. It was about recognition, not of who he was before, but of who he'd become to meet her where she always stood, honest, steady, and whole. The card arrived without a courier, just an envelope tucked inside Alexis's mailbox on a breezy Friday morning. No gold trim, no wax seal, no unnecessary grandeur, just her name, written in Lennox's sharp but softened handwriting. Inside, a single line. You changed the room. I'd like you to come back to it, this time on your terms. There was no time listed, no address needed, because she already knew. It was for Christmas Eve, back at Greystone. Alexis stood in front of her closet for almost 15 minutes that morning, not because she didn't know what to wear, but because she was thinking about how far she'd come since last Christmas Eve. Last year she'd walked into that estate tense and guarded, dragged by an unexpected call and pulled by unfinished hurt. This year, she'd walk in knowing exactly who she was. She picked a rich emerald green wrap dress, comfortable, elegant, powerful. She wore her natural curls freely, soft gold earrings, and the same flats she wore. To client meetings when she needed to remember, she built herself from the ground up. There would be no performance tonight, only presence. When she arrived at Greystone, it was nothing like the year before. There were candles in the windows, not electric ones, but real wax melting slowly behind the glass. The sound of Ella Fitzgerald's "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" floated through the air before she even knocked. And when the door opened, Lennox didn't greet her with words. He stepped forward slowly, took one look at her, and said, "You're home." Alexis blinked, once, before stepping inside. "I'm visiting," she corrected softly. He smiled. "I'll take that." The gathering was small, maybe 12 people. People she now knew by name. Colette greeted her with a warm, motherly hug. "You look like peace tonight." "Trying," Alexis replied. "No," Colette said. "Peace doesn't try, it just exists." Lennox's cousin Drew handed her a mug of cider. "You're officially family now. We took a vote." Alexis laughed. "Without my consent?" "Exactly." Dinner was served family style, with Lennox insisting on doing the carving himself. There was no chef tonight. No hired staff in tuxedos. Just a few helping hands in the kitchen and the comfort of passing dishes around like it was a regular Sunday dinner. At the table, there was no long speech, no toasts, no spotlight. And yet, Lennox reached gently for her hand midway through the meal, not to make a statement, but to stay connected. Alexis didn't pull away, because it didn't feel like a claim. It felt like gratitude. After dessert, people gathered around the living room's fireplace. Colette passed around small slips of paper and asked each person to write down something you're leaving behind this year, and something you're inviting in. Alexis stared at her blank slip for a while, then wrote, "Leaving behind, waiting for validation, inviting in, love that doesn't ask me to shrink." She folded it, placed it in the dish. No one had to read theirs aloud, but Lennox glanced at her as he slipped his in. She didn't ask what he wrote, and he didn't ask her. That was the rhythm of them now, a quiet respect that didn't force itself into moments that were still unfolding. Later, while most of the guests mingled in the parlor, Alexis found herself on the back patio alone. The air was crisp. The sky was clear. She sipped a fresh cup of tea Lennox had made for her, the kind she liked, with orange peel and honey. She heard his footsteps behind her before he even spoke. "You always find the quiet corners," he said. "Quiet corners find me." He chuckled, stepping beside her. They looked out across the lawn. Snow dusted the edge of the property, the soft lights from the house reflected in the glass. After a moment she asked, "Did you expect this?" He shook his head. "I was afraid to, but you hoped." Every day, she turned to face him and said, without ceremony, "I forgive you." He exhaled slowly, a breath that sounded like something uncoiling in his chest. "Thank you. I'm not doing it for you." "I know," she nodded, "but I do want you to know it changed something. In me." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet pouch. Her brows lifted. "No," he said quickly, catching the look. "Not a ring." She relaxed. "It's a key," he said, offering it to her. Alexis held the pouch in her palm, but didn't open it yet. "I'm not asking you to move in," Lennox said. "I'm just saying this space is yours any time, without having to be summoned or requested." She closed her hand around the pouch. "I'll think about it. That's all I need." They didn't kiss that night. There were no fireworks. But there was peace, a kind that neither of them had ever known before. And as Alexis leaned gently into his side, her head resting near his shoulder, she realized something. Healing didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was silent, and still, and strong enough to hold you without asking for anything in return. Alexis returned to Greystone the next morning, not for a dinner, not for a meeting, and not because she was invited. She came because she wanted to. That was new. Lennox opened the door without surprise. "You came back," he said, a bit quieter than usual. She shrugged, stepping inside. "I told you I was thinking about it." He didn't reach for her. He didn't speak in metaphors. He just stepped aside and let her through. They sat in the library, the same place where she once felt like a ghost at the edge of a dynasty. But today, she sat on the couch, crossed her legs, sipped her tea like she'd always belonged there, because, maybe now, she did. They worked side by side that afternoon. He reviewed funding reports. She drafted impact statements and reworded a few outreach letters for the scholarship program. There was no need to fill the silence. They each knew the other was present. Every so often, Lennox would glance at her like he was trying to memorize how this new version of them felt. Not intense, not chaotic, but solid. Alexis didn't need to fill space anymore to prove her place, and Lennox no longer tried to control silence to avoid his feelings. They had both evolved, not to fit each other, but to respect who they were becoming. Later, Colette arrived, dropping off a box of framed photos Lennox had ordered printed for the new hallway wall project. Alexis flipped through them slowly. There were photos of the mentorship program, the scholarship recipients, Lennox and Drew at a food pantry event, Colette surrounded by school kids. And then, there was one of Alexis. Someone must have taken it during the community dinner. She was laughing, mid-sentence, holding a paper plate and leaning toward one of the kids. The light in the image was soft, natural. She looked full of life, full of presence, full of something that used to escape her, ease. She handed it to Lennox. "You're really putting this one up?" He looked at it, then at her. "First one going up." She laughed. "You're ridiculous." He smiled. "I'm consistent." That night, they stayed in. No dinner parties. No guest list. Lennox offered to cook. Alexis said she'd help. They made something simple: garlic shrimp, rice, and steamed vegetables. It was quiet, warm. After the dishes were washed and the lights were low, they sat on the couch watching. An old documentary Lennox had loved in college but hadn't revisited in years. Halfway through, Alexis reached for his hand. Not to initiate something, not to test anything, just because she wanted to feel it there. His hand met hers without hesitation. No tension, no anticipation, just stillness. They didn't need to speak about what they were anymore. It was already taking shape. One shared space, one quiet act, one uninterrupted evening at a time. Before she left that night, he walked her to the door again. A habit neither of them tried to break. As she put on her coat, she turned to face him. "I'm not rushing," she said. "I don't want you to. But I'm not running either." His eyes held hers. "I know." Then, after a beat, she reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the key, held it between her fingers, and said, "I don't need it today, but I'll keep it." Lennox exhaled softly, not as a man relieved, but as a man who finally understood that trust is slow, and still sacred. Alexis leaned in, kissed him once on the cheek, deliberately, and whispered, "See you next week." He nodded. Every week. After she left, he stood at the door for a long while. He didn't lock it right away, didn't move to turn off the porch light. He just stood there, taking in what it felt like to be chosen again. Not because of pressure, not because of guilt, but because he earned her willingness back, one quiet moment at a time. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it. Spring arrived early that year. The sun lingered a little longer. The trees on Greystone's edge began to bloom in soft whites and pale pinks. And for the first time since Alexis had ever stepped foot in the estate, windows were open, letting. Light and fresh air glide through the halls, once filled with closed doors and stiff tradition. Greystone had changed, because Lennox had changed, because she had changed, and neither of them needed to say it aloud anymore. That morning, Alexis arrived with paint on her sleeve and a notebook in her hand. She'd spent the weekend helping Kayla, the young mentee she'd met at the community dinner, prepare for a college interview and finish a passion project for her scholarship. They'd painted the girl's bedroom wall with quotes from women of color who changed the world. It reminded Alexis of her younger self, the version of her who wrote her own future down on sticky notes and taped them to bathroom mirrors. Lennox met her at the door. He didn't ask where she'd been, didn't reach for a kiss, didn't comment on the paint. He just held the door and said, "Tea?" She nodded. "Make it strong." They sat on the back patio under the canopy Lennox had installed last year but never used, until Alexis insisted they stop wasting beautiful days indoors. They reviewed the spring plans for the Youth Wellness Initiative. Alexis flagged a few edits. Lennox listened. No tension, no over-explaining, just balance. After a while, she closed her notebook and looked at him. "Have you ever thought about what this is becoming?" He set his cup down. "All the time. And I think it's real, and slow, and exactly how it should be." She studied his face. He wasn't smiling to charm her. He wasn't nervous. He was simply, "Sure." She nodded. "I think we're still growing into it." "I agree. I'm not interested in labels. I'm not interested in rushing." They shared a quiet glance. Then she asked, "But what are you interested in, Lennox?" He leaned back. "Shared mornings, a house that isn't always perfect, quiet days where we build things that matter, and a kind of love that doesn't ask either of us to shrink." Alexis breathed in deeply, and for the first time, it didn't feel like she was waiting for the right moment to believe him. She already did. That night, Greystone hosted a small, private gathering for the spring launch of the scholarship expansion. Just 10 guests. No press, no podiums. At the last minute, Lennox asked Alexis if she'd join him at the front. "No speeches," she warned. "Just a thank you," he said. They stood together, facing the circle of young scholars and supporters. Lennox raised his glass, simple and short. "I used to think building legacy meant building distance, but the truth is, the closer we stand to real people, the better we understand what legacy is supposed to feel like." He looked at Alexis, then stepped back, allowing her to speak, but not forcing her. She didn't step forward. She didn't need to. She just raised her own glass and said, "I'm proud of what we're building. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real." That was all. That was enough. After the guests left and the lights dimmed, Alexis found herself in the library again. Same couch, same shelves, same man, but no longer the same silence. Lennox joined her, handing her a cup of warm water and ginger. Her throat had gone hoarse from answering questions all night. "Still want to disappear?" he asked gently. "No," she said, "but I still need my space sometimes." He nodded. "You'll always have it." She looked up. "Even if I stay?" His eyes held hers. "Especially if you stay." They didn't kiss that night. Not yet. But as they sat on the couch, leaning toward one another, hands quietly laced, Alexis felt something unlock in her chest. And for once, there was nothing left to guard. No walls. No unfinished conversations. No unspoken expectations, just trust, and the slow, beautiful truth that she was no longer loving from behind a wall of past hurt. She was loving from where she stood, fully. The sun had barely risen when Alexis found herself wide awake. It was Easter Sunday. Quiet, bright, clear skies over Greystone. She had stayed the night, not because of romance, not because of routine, but because it felt safe. There was something holy about waking up to light that didn't demand anything from you. And Lennox had made no demands. No assumptions, only presence. When she stepped into the kitchen, he was already there, barefoot, in a plain grey t-shirt, pouring tea into 2 mugs. "You always wake up this early?" she asked. "Only when you're here." She raised an eyebrow. "Is that a line?" "No, it's the truth." She accepted the tea, took a long sip, and leaned against the counter. Then said, "You feel different these days." "I am. And you're not waiting for me to say anything back." He shook his head. "I'm not waiting. I'm listening." She nodded, slowly. "Good." Later that afternoon, a few friends and community partners joined them for a casual backyard lunch. Folding tables, real paper napkins, plastic cups, the kind of celebration that didn't need a theme, just gratitude. Colette arrived with lemon cake. Drew brought his infamous baked beans. And Kayla, the bright, bold scholarship student, handed Alexis a card she had made by hand. On the front was a drawing of a tree with roots that glowed like veins. Alexis opened it. Inside, in small print, was written, "You helped me grow. And now I'm planting my own." She blinked quickly. Lennox watched her from a few feet away, smiling faintly. Not to take credit, not to be noticed, just to witness. That evening, when everyone had left and the air had turned soft and cool, Lennox asked if she wanted to walk the grounds with him. They took the gravel path behind the garden. No words, just steps, until they reached the grove of small trees near the back edge of the estate. He stopped, then turned to face her. "I told myself I wouldn't make any requests this year," he said. Alexis looked up at him, calm. "But I want to ask one thing." She waited. "I don't want a grand ceremony, or titles, or promises you're not ready for. Okay. I just want you to stop knocking." She blinked. "What?" "I want you to use the key, not as a symbol, but as a choice. I want you to come and go as you please, but without hesitation." He paused. "I want this to be yours too." Alexis didn't answer right away. She stepped closer, slipped her hand into his, then said, "I already have." They walked back slowly. And that night, for the first time in their shared history, Alexis didn't leave after dinner. She didn't rush. She didn't question. She stayed, not because she owed him something, but because she had built something here, and she trusted what they were building together. It wasn't the kind of ending people tell in love stories. It wasn't a ring. It wasn't a vow. It was better. It was quiet, earned, lasting. What if the love that's meant for you doesn't arrive perfect? What if it arrives wiser? Tonight, you met a woman who once walked into a mansion full of strangers, carrying only her pain and a name someone whispered in shame. But now, she walks into that same room on her own terms, no longer waiting to be chosen, because she chose herself first. And the man, he didn't chase her with flowers or promises. He earned her trust back by doing the one thing that changes everything. He stayed consistent. If this story spoke to something in your heart, if you've ever had to rebuild trust, not just with someone else, but with yourself, then this is your moment to connect. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone come back different? Did you give them another chance, or close the door for good? Tap that like button if you believe love can grow in slow, quiet spaces. Share this with someone who's navigating their own healing. Maybe they need the reminder. They're not alone. And it's okay to start again. And if this story held you, moved you, or stayed with you even a little, hit subscribe, because here on Mr. Charles Stories, we're building a space for truth, grace, and the kind of love that doesn't rush the process. Now take a breath, hold on to your peace, and I'll see you in the next one.